In Afghanistan and Pakistan, America's interests are clear. We must stop the resurgence of safe havens that enable terrorists to threaten America.
US President Donald Trump unveils his long-awaited strategy for resolving the nearly 16-year conflict in Afghanistan. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Donald Trump came into office wanting to pull US troops out of Afghanistan, but by his own admission, becoming president has a way of changing a person's perspective. And so it was, after careful study and a comprehensive review by his national security team, that Mr. Trump decided to reverse course. Instead of withdrawing, the United States will re-energize its commitment to the Afghan conflict. In a speech short on details, the president spoke of concerns that a hasty withdrawal would create a vacuum for terrorists.
I concluded that the security threats we face in Afghanistan and the broader region are immense. Today, 20 U.S. designated foreign terrorist organizations are active in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the highest concentration in any region, anywhere in the world.
Well, there's much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Joining us from New York is Raza Rumi. He's a scholar in residence at Ithaca College and an editor for Pakistan's Daily Times. Michael Johns is co-founder of the U.S. National Tea Party movement and a former speechwriter for President George H.W. Bush. He joins us from Philadelphia. With us from St. Louis is Afshin Molavi. He's a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And joining us here in Washington, right here in the studio, is the president and chief correspondent of Feature Story News, Simon Marks. Thank you to all of you for being with us. Simon, let me start with you right here in the studio. Let's take a listen to what the president said, a little bit more of what the president said, and what he called a new strategy. Let's watch.
A core pillar of our new strategy is a shift from a time-based approach to one based on conditions. We will not talk about numbers of troops or our plans for further military activities. America's enemies must never know our plans or believe they can wait us out. America will continue its support for the Afghan government and the Afghan military as they confront the Taliban. We are a partner and a friend, but we will not dictate to the Afghan people how to live or how to govern their own complex society. We are not nation building again. We are killing terrorists.
So, listening to that, anything new, anything to give you confidence that something's changed?
Well, he's tweaking Barack Obama's policy after spending months, no, years, saying that Barack Obama's policy was hopeless, that the United States should be folding its tent, it should be walking away from this protracted engagement in Afghanistan, which he always characterized as a 17-year involvement, even though it's not quite that long that the United States has been there. But look, this is a man who was elected telling his supporters that he was not going to deepen America's entanglements in far-off nations about which they know little and cared even less. And here he is saying, well, now I'm sitting behind the desk of the Oval Office. I kind of realize things are much more complicated than I thought they were when I was out on the campaign trail. So never mind all that. We are, in fact, going to deepen America's entanglement in Afghanistan and do so in a way where he's not even going to tell, he says, the families of American servicemen how many of them are going to have to go to Afghanistan, or even vaguely how long they might want to be there. It is no surprise that so many of his critics on the right, including the very prominent talk show host Laura Ingraham today, Stephen Bannon now back at Breitbart News following his removal from the White House inner circle, it's no surprise that they're furious.
Okay, let me get Michael's view on this. Michael, when we listen to the president here, as I said, very short on detail, but is he saying to the American people, to the Afghan people, and to the rest of the world, trust me, I can't give you any details, but you're going to have to trust me. I've got a way out of this.
Short on detail as it relates to military logistics, only because that's not something, as he said during the campaign, and as he said again last night, should be revealed to our enemy. I think in due time and very shortly, in fact, we'll learn what's involved. And there's a pretty broad understanding that we're talking about moving military advisors and troops from roughly 8,400 up maybe 4,000 or so. But most important, I think, and where the president was right on target, is that the situation on the ground in Afghanistan has worsened considerably over the last year or so, with the Taliban gaining ground, with the Haqqani network becoming even more ruthless and aggressive and threatening. And, somewhere between 15 and 20 designated terrorist movements now operating in Afghanistan on the ground. Now, if there's anything we learned from the 9/11 attacks, if we just take one thing away from the 9/11 attacks, it is that we cannot allow foreign terrorist movements to operate unchallenged on foreign grounds, because we know their intentions. And I think that is what's driving the president's decision. I think he made it clear we're out of the nation building business. We're in the terrorist killing business, and that he's going to do this successfully, efficiently, and clear Afghanistan in a way so that it does not represent a threat to U.S. interests or the U.S. people.
Okay, Raza, when we listened to the president there, he was very hard on Pakistan, accusing the country of harboring criminals and terrorists, as he put it. Let's listen to what he had to say about that.
We can no longer be silent about Pakistan's safe havens for terrorist organizations, the Taliban, and other groups that pose a threat to the region and beyond. Pakistan has much to gain from partnering with our effort in Afghanistan. It has much to lose by continuing to harbor criminals and terrorists. We have been paying Pakistan billions and billions of dollars. At the same time, they are housing the very terrorists that we are fighting. But that will have to change, and that will change immediately.
Raza, how are those comments going to be received in Pakistan?
Well, these comments have not been received well, as you can imagine, and there has been an uproar, and the government has officially responded to Mr. Trump's remarks by saying that the U.S. needs to work with Pakistan. And let me also add to this debate about, the cost of war, that, whatever limitations and failures of Pakistan's military and its elites are, nearly 70,000 Pakistanis have died in the last decade or so, and largely it's linked to the unstable border with Afghanistan, with the influx of the Taliban and even Al-Qaeda when the war on terror was at its peak. So, for the U.S. to completely ignore that is simply not on. I mean, yes, even as a Pakistani, I think that our government needs to revise some of its policies and improve them, particularly with respect to supporting militias like the Taliban. But, also what is not very clear as to what, in 16 years with trillions of dollars and with thousands and thousands of troops, what was not achieved, how will it be achieved with a small addition to the troops in Afghanistan. So, basically the U.S. strategy in Afghanistan remains flawed. And one example of that is that while the Taliban are called as terrorists, but officially the U.S. still wants to make peace with them towards the end game in Afghanistan. So, there's this contradiction here, and there's a bit of confusion here as well. And I'm not denying that Pakistan has not supported the Afghan Taliban and the militias linked to them. But at the same time, the way Afghanistan is managed, the stories of corruption and the fact that, billions of aid has not reached the people, certainly calls for a much wider review than just scapegoating Pakistan.
Right, Afshin, not everybody, of course, agrees that Pakistan is a haven for terrorists. This is what the Chinese Foreign Ministry had to say.
We believe that the international community should fully recognize Pakistan's anti-terrorism efforts. Pakistan was on the front line in the struggle against terrorism and has made great sacrifices and important contributions in the fight. We're happy to see Pakistan and the United States carry out anti-terror cooperation on the basis of mutual respect and work together for the security and stability in the region and world.
So, Afshin, here we have some regional power politics playing out there. It's going to be a lot more complicated for the United States, isn't it?
Yeah, and absolutely it is. And you know, Donald Trump basically, you know, there's that old adage, Anand, where you stand depends on where you sit. And certainly sitting behind the Oval Office desk, he saw that this was far more complex than he imagined. And he deferred to his generals. And say what you will about President Donald Trump, he has a stellar national security team. But I think he's going to have to face some hard truths. And the hard truth is this. Even with the surge, President Obama's surge of 100,000 troops or so, they were still not able to defeat the Taliban. And so adding 4,000 troops as advisors is a containment strategy. It's not a winning strategy. And guess what? There is going to have to be some nation building. I'm not suggesting that it has to be only driven by the United States. It has to be homegrown Afghanistan nation building. But you're not going to defeat the Taliban until those very symptoms and those problems that exist in Afghan society, including corruption in Afghanistan's government, are cured. And finally, when it comes to Pakistan, you know, as Raza noted, you know, again, where you stand depends on where you sit. It is complex. This is not the Pakistan of 2002, 3, 4, 5. There have been a lot of losses of life of security forces in Pakistan. They are doing more than they were a few years ago. And, you know, with China investing $46 to $50 billion in Pakistan, foreign policy mandarins in Washington may ask the question, who lost Pakistan after this speech, and if actions follow?
Right, let me take that up with Michael Johns. Michael, I just want to stay a bit with this issue on Pakistan. If the president and his advisors decide to turn the screws on Pakistan, I'm wondering if the United States will ultimately be the loser. The main supply line to Afghanistan goes through Pakistan. And as we just heard, if the United States takes any punitive action against Pakistan, will not China step in to fill that void?
Well, we provide Pakistan with over $700 billion in aid annually, even though they're not a part of NATO or any former alliance, but they are an ally of the United States, and the relationship is hugely important. Unfortunately, like just about everything else around the world, Barack Obama left the world on fire, and U.S. relationship with Pakistan deteriorated considerably on his watch, which is in part what is mandating now the re-engagement in Afghanistan. I believe that the Secretary of State Tillerson has been right on target, exactly right, in saying that, you know, we want to approach this, negotiate, you know, hopefully an end to their engagement in support of the Taliban, other terrorist movements in Afghanistan, not in their interest to be doing that. And, you know, as is consistent with any U.S. engagement, that includes carrots and sticks. I mean, we have a very valued relationship there, but Pakistan has to hold their own in the relationship. And what we're asking of them is so entirely reasonable.
Right,
and that is do not support movements in Afghanistan that designed to kill Americans on the American homeland.
Yeah, except that the president carried the stick on a very public forum there, which, you know, countries who call themselves allies don't normally do. Simon,
well, but importantly, though, Secretary Tillerson did call, there were communications with Pakistan before the president's speech last night. So I think there was immense diplomatic sensitivity.
All right, I want to get to Simon. Simon, Barack Obama left the world on fire.
Yes, well, I think that's a slight hyperbole on Michael's part, but I have a bigger question. Really. Who's doing all this negotiating? Who's doing all this engagement? The State Department is a hollowed-out shell. There are hundreds of positions, many of them high-level senior positions, that have not yet been filled by Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, with apparently no intent to fill them. One of the positions that is vacant is the U.S. Special Representative to where? Pakistan and Afghanistan. So who's going to do all of this engagement? I know Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was on the phone to the Pakistani Prime Minister, but he's not the nuts and bolts guy who's going to be doing all of this work. Where is that going to happen if the State Department is going to continue being a shadow of what it was not just during Barack Obama's administration, but during George W. Bush's administration and all previous administrations that have led up to the utterly abnormal situation that exists down on C Street here in Washington now.
Raza, what are Pakistan's